Okay, hi, I'm Mitchell Rushlow. I'm the principal architect at ROST Architects, and welcome to our ROST Talks live series. Today, we're going to be answering the question, what is the team of consultants that I need for my custom home project? So it's a really, really great question, and something that's incredibly important. Sometimes it can be overlooked, but we'll go through the different team members and then also how to kind of arrange the agreements with each of the team members. It's a bit of a more nuts and bolts discussion today compared to the last series, or the last live stream, but it's really important that these agreements and the right people come onto the team. So there's going to be many different people involved on your project. Each is going to bring their own expertise to the table. And it's cliche, but the quality of your project team will be one of the biggest factors in determining the outcome of your home, and also determining the quality of the experience that you have in going through the process of designing and building your home. Today, I'm going to discuss the design and engineering team specifically. So there will be the other team could be categorized as the construction team, which will be made up of the general contractor and all of the subcontractors, fabricators, suppliers, all that will be for another episode. Today, it's going to be the design and engineering teams of consultants. Keep in mind that each project is unique. So I'm going to go through the general list for a typical project team. And then we can discuss some of the nuances and maybe additional consultants that would be brought on in certain situations. Before we go into the list of team members, I want to go in and talk about what you should look for in the agreements with each of these consultants first. So I want to go through that, and then we can talk about what we need to be looking for in each one of these agreements. That will set you up, set us up for the discussion of to allow us to go into the different the list of the individual consultants. So there's endless types of agreements and structures, and each firm and discipline will do it a bit differently. So each agreement needs to be reviewed carefully and tailored to fit the unique needs of your specific project. The primary things you want to understand in each consultant agreement is, number one, scope, schedule, fee, and then obviously quality of work. So lean on your architect to help you dial these in, get clarity on them, and get their counsel on them. For clients, for example, in our office, we prepare a spreadsheet with 3 qualified options for each consultant needed, for each discipline needed. For example, if we're pricing out a custom home, we know that we need a structural engineer, right? And we'll talk about this later, but the way we would set that up is we have 3 qualified bidders for the structural engineering discipline on the team. We're going to have categories in that spreadsheet that show the schedule that engineer is going to be able to perform the work within. It's going to show obviously the fee structure, the total fee. It's going to show the fee structure, schedule, and then the scope. So what they have included inside of that proposal. When we're comparing proposals from engineer to engineer, we want to make sure that the scope is apples to apples. So I'll give you an example. To be more specific, for a custom home, we want to contract the engineer so that to make sure that they're designing the structure for the home. Obviously, we want to be clear about including elements such as the engineering for the stair. Some engineers won't include that. If we want to include exterior site walls, those need to be included. It needs to be clear that those will be included. If we're including retaining walls, that needs to be clear. If we want them to engineer the pool on the project, that should also be very clear. So making sure that when we bid out our 3 structural engineers, that they all have those apples to apples scope items in each one of their proposals so that we can compare them, apples to apples. Okay, scope, we talked about that. fee structure. There's going to be many different types of billing arrangements that these consultants will propose. Some will be hourly, some will be fixed fees, some will give estimates. Just being aware of those fee structures. And the primary thing in that regard is trying to limit the open-ended arrangement. So an hourly fee structure with no estimate, you want to try to just be careful with those. There are some certain circumstances where those are appropriate, and we can insert controls for billing, but in most scenarios, we want to try to limit those open-ended fee structures for the owners so that they can at least put in a number into their project budget. And then schedule is pretty obvious. How long is it going to take them to complete the work? What's their turnaround time for answering questions in the design process? What's their turnaround time for being notified to go to site visits? What's their turnaround time for answering RFIs during the construction project or a construction of the home? Just understanding kind of at what tempo they work at. A big one is also understanding how long it typically takes them to turn around plan check comments. So that's a specific question that we want to ask them. And then the quality of work is obviously the big one. Quality of work, and I'll say also the kind of general demeanor. Are they reasonable? Are the workability? Are good people? How are they on a personal level? These projects are long. They're 2 to 3 years usually. So just having somebody on the team that the owner's comfortable having a discussion with, the architect's comfortable having a discussion with, and the contractor too, is good to have works well with them, knowing that all the different players who will be interacting have a nice kind of stable relationship. Okay, kind of talked about how that's arranged in the table or how we set that up with our clients. It's important to note that the owner, when they come to the architect at the conception of a project, they typically don't know all the consultants that they need. That's why we're doing this live stream. It's really, in many ways, the architect that will bring this list or these recommendations to the owner to say, hey, owner, we need this list of consultants on this specific project. And to bring those forth to them, to educate the owner, tell them what each one of them does, and to say what work they'll actually be performing on the job. So that process of getting the owner acquainted with these different players is something that should be really worked through, and that we view and I view as one of the responsibilities of the architect on the project. Okay. As Ed mentioned, the fee structure for some of these consultants, designers, lighting designers, whatever it is, some may need to be open-ended. Some may request to be open-ended. That is appropriate for things such as when you're going through, we call them discretionary reviews, or reviews that are with a HOA or an agency, a group that reviews for design, in which they would say, hey, we would like to request that you make this design change. In that scenario, when projects have to go through a process like that, it's really difficult for architects, designers, engineers to put hard numbers to their work during those phases, because we don't typically know what, or the magnitude, let's say, of changes that those agencies will require. And I'm talking specifically for discretionary reviews. In other areas, let's say cities, where there's a prescriptive set of requirements that it's formulaic, we can abide by these zoning requirements, we know that we're conforming to it, we're able to be much more specific about the fee structure, timeline, of the inside of our proposals and contracts, because there's more predictability in that case. Those are, it all depends on the agency, and that's something you'll want to kind of discuss with your architect at the conception of your project. Which city are you working in? What are the different steps or agencies that you have to get approval from during the process? Are they discretionary? Are they not? What does that whole sequence look like? Okay, I think we kind of went into a bit of the nuts and bolts of the agreement. Let's jump into the different team members on a typical project. So I'll start with the obvious, the architect. So the architect on your project is traditionally the project leader or the prime consultant, it's often called. Your architect is usually the first consultant brought on board by the owner. In many cases, your architect can take on the responsibility of assembling or directly hiring the consultants needed on the project. So the architect in some scenarios can directly hire the consultants underneath themselves. In other scenarios, it's appropriate for the owner to hire them directly. It just depends on several different variables. There's appropriate circumstances, or there's appropriate arrangements for different circumstances. So that's something you want to speak with your architect about. Okay, your project architect is going to create the design of the home, starting from concept design to the highly detailed construction or technical drawings that are going to take your project through the permitting process, usually, chaperone the bidding or acquiring of a contractor to build the project, and then perform construction administration, which is the construction phase services or site visits while the project is being built. That's a very high level of what the description of what the architect does. But traditionally, a full-service architecture firm is performing services from the conception of the project all the way through the final punch walk when the thing is built. There are different firms that specialize in, let's say, in individual phases of that. So they're not offering full-service architectural services. They're just, let's say, maybe they say we just do the design portion, and then a second firm will be brought in to do the technical documents, construction documents. That's possible. That's appropriate for projects, let's say, in different locations. So where geography is an issue. For example, we've been asked on projects in the past to be the design architect for a job in where we will design the project, but because the job is either overseas in a different state, across the country, whatever it is, they will then hire a local architect to do the construction documents for that job, because they may understand the local site requirements in more detail. They may have easier access to the site. They can go to job site visits quicker, as opposed to us flying across the country to go visit a site. We have a project in Montana right now where that's kind of the arrangement. It's been working nicely, and so that is a possibility. But typically, and I think a good amount of architecture firms like to do the full service architectural services from start to beginning. Okay, during the design process, your architect typically takes on the responsibility to coordinate the rest of the project team. The project architect typically reviews the consultant's drawings when they submit them, vets out conflicts or collisions between the different components of their designs, and make sure that everything jives. Okay. The next consultant we'll talk about is the geotechnical engineer. So new ground-up homes will need a geological engineer to take soil samples and conduct a report on the soil composition of your site. The soil type on your property is going to impact many factors on your home. In the soils report, your geologist is going to recommend the foundation type to the structural engineer for the best foundation system to suit that kind of soil makeup. For example, if you're dealing with a site where bedrock or stable soil, let's say, is far below the ground level or grade, that geologist, through boring your site, will understand the makeup of how deep topsoil is, how deep the other layers are, and then where that bedrock is. They're going to discover that. And then they're going to be able to say, okay, based upon my geological investigation, I know that on this site, we're going to have to use caissons to get the house stabilized into solid bedrock. So they'll specify, they'll say, okay, we need caissons going down 20 to 30 feet, whatever that is, based upon the makeup of the soil. And we need to get them at least embedded into bedrock 10 feet, whatever that is. Other projects on stable soil will say typical slab on grade construction. They'll say mat slab, they'll say post-tension slab, whatever that recommendation is, that's going to come from your geotechnical engineer. Okay, conducting the soils investigation and geological report should really be one of the first things that you do when starting out on your journey. Some people come to the architect with that report already done. Others come to the architect first and say, okay, what do I need to do first? Hiring a geological engineer to do the investigation is usually one of the first things that we'll say. We need to get out there and get the soil composition of the site. Your architect's going to ask for this report at the beginning of the project. We need this to, primarily help dial in a cost estimate for the home. That's really one of the largest things that we use it for at the beginning of the project. For example, in that instance where I mentioned caissons, if owners come to us and they say we have a budget of, let's say $2 million, they have a site, they have a geological investigation, which reveals to us that bedrock is 60 feet deep or 50 feet deep. We need a bunch of caissons that are going to need to be 70 feet deep. We know that foundation cost is going to be massive and probably take up 50% or more of that $2 million budget, possibly. I'm just putting numbers out there. And so in which case we can, at the beginning of the project, advise the owner and say, hey, listen, based upon the soil composition of the site, we know that there's going to need to be an extremely robust foundation on this site. And it's going to estimate a cost roughly X amount of dollars. That helps us to determine what is left of that budget that we can dedicate to the home. So that's really an extremely important thing to determine early on in the project so that the budget can be accurate. We don't want to under budget or underbid what that foundation is going to cost. Okay, the next consultant, again, that will usually be brought on early in the project is the surveyor. And I have here surveyor or civil engineer. We'll talk about kind of the differences of each one of those. Typically, the civil engineering firms offer civil engineering and surveying services. Okay, so a survey is really the thing that we need at the beginning of a project. That's what the architect needs to begin to lay out, perform analysis, and perform analysis on the project. So it needs to be conducted early on, really before we start to put pen to paper. Again, the survey is something that owners sometimes come to us already having completed. Other times, we will make recommendations and do our typical bid out process for qualified surveyors in the area to help an owner procure that on their lot. Okay, survey is going to show property lines, locations of major site features, site topography, utility locations, and other site features. Slopes, it's going to kind of give the lay of the land. So it's a document that will be in coordination usually with your title report on the property. So it's going to show things, maybe if you have easements on your property, other encumbrances, it will typically show that. And then, so let's talk about, in that same vein, the civil engineer, usually the same firm, sometimes not, will then use the architect's site plan and the survey to begin their civil engineering work. So the civil engineer, the reason that they usually perform surveying services is because the survey is the bedrock, that's the foundation of their engineering work. We'll talk about what a civil engineer does. They design and calculate the required site grading and drainage. They calculate water runoff on the site, determine if any water filtration systems are needed or required, and they help to set the slab elevation in relationship to the surrounding site. So I've heard it said before that, when you think of a civil engineer, they're really going to do things, if you take grade about 8 inches up, they're going to do about 8 inches up from grade and down. That's kind of their area that they work in. Civil engineer doesn't need to be signed on right away. It's the survey that you really need to procure early on in the project. The civil engineering services can wait till the design is further developed. There's no need to hire on the civil engineer before kind of finessing the design or getting a concept design out on paper. Okay, the next one is a big one, structural engineer. Yeah, structural engineers should be brought on after the schematic or concept design of the home is completed by the architect. So the structural engineer is going to take the architect's design and begin to specify the exact framing members and structural system needed to support the design. They're going to design the foundation of the home, the footings, posts, beams, joists, roof, all of that. Yeah, they specify the sizes of all of those elements, locate shear walls, and design the lateral system for the home. The structural engineer is going to work with your architectural team to make sure that their system will be concealed within the architectural envelope or expressed if that's the design intent. So it needs to jive with the architect's work. Obviously, those two are so closely intertwined. A large amount of coordination needs to go on between those two disciplines. So the architect and the structural engineer should be working extremely close together. One of the ways that we do that is through using BIM software. BIM is Building Information Modeling. So in many of our projects, we'll actually require or seek to hire out engineers that use the same BIM software that we use or have BIM capabilities. And that's what I mean, to put in simpler terms. They will actually model in 3D the structural system of the home. So we'll have a model of all of the framing on this house. Then we're going to take that model and overlay that into our architectural model. So we're going to have those two models overlapping and in a 3D space that we can fly around and identify collisions. We can identify areas where maybe beams will be popping out in the soffits, where we have exposed steel and we don't want exposed steel. If we do have exposed steel, dialing in the detailing of how that actually looks, what are those connections, what do the bolts look like, what's the welding look like. It's been a great way for us to make sure that coordination is really tight, but also the primary purpose is to eliminate potential construction issues when the home is being built. That's the main purpose of it. When you have conflicts between the structural and architectural systems, and those are discovered in the field, and they weren't vetted out during the design and documenting process, that will inevitably lead to construction delays. You have to figure out solutions in the field. It's going to cost more money for the owner. Project delays, which also result in oftentimes more money, and or not ideal detailing and design finish of the house. So having, again, going back to the model, having those two models is really, really critical for us. Okay, we talked about the civil engineer a bit. I'll go through that. We talked about what that, what the civil engineer, their scope of work does. Give me a second, let me move through these. Okay, the next one is the Title 24 Energy Consultant, and this is specific to California. Some other states, they may not require this, or they call this a different thing, but in California, we have to abide by Title 24, which is our energy code requirements. So the California Building Code requires that an energy report be conducted on the proposed or on the building to create the overall energy use or to determine the overall energy use for the structure. The report is going to use size. The report's going to look at things or factors such as the size and types of the glazing or the glass, the windows, or the sliding doors, the quality of the HVAC system, the energy efficiency of the HVAC system, insulation thickness and type in the wall. So what's our insulation value on the exterior of the home? And many other factors to determine, orientation being one of them, but in addition, many other factors to determine if the building is going to pass or fail those energy code requirements. So the consultant will run those energy calcs. We will review them, review the calcs, confirm that they are reflective of the design that is in place, and that we're using the same types of insulation that we have specified in the house that's on the report, the same types of glazing values, the U values and the SHGC values. Those are just the energy values on the glass. Those are what's specified in the drawings are reflected. The same thing is reflected in the report, in the energy report. So if the building does not meet the minimum energy requirements, the design team needs to modify the design. Okay, we'll talk about lighting designer. I think this is one that is not a lighting designer. They're fantastic. They're really great to have on projects. They're oftentimes, sometimes not totally necessary, depending upon the quality caliber of home. But on a lot of our projects, we use a specific lighting designer. So a good lighting designer can elevate your home to the next level. Your lighting designer is going to create the lighting layout for the home. They're going to specify lighting fixtures, taking into account the appropriate light levels needed in each room. They're going to specify the temperature of the light, the lighting scenes, they call it. So the dimmability, which fixtures are turned off, which ones are turned on. They look at the room as almost a scene, and think of it almost as a movie scene in a way. And they set up these scenes. Those scenes are then programmed into the home automation system or lighting control system and saved, so that when somebody goes into the home, presses a button on a keypad or on, let's say, a Savant system on their iPad, they press scene 1, the lighting fixtures all load and show that scene that was pre-programmed to produce this atmospheric effect. It's a really nice way to do it. The lighting designer will show switches on what lights need to be on. They're going to show switch legs sometimes. I have in here, don't underestimate the importance of a good lighting design in your home. It's extremely important. Interior lighting, really important. Exterior light, super important, especially for me. I think that it can make or break a home. If you light a home, it can make it look really flattering. If you don't light the home properly, it can really kind of take a lot of the appeal out of it. The lighting designer and the architect and interior designer all kind of collaborate and coordinate on the lighting design in the home. So a lot of the times the interior designer is going to have a lot of input on the lighting design too, especially in things like the kitchen. And do they have LED strips that light up underneath the cabinets or uppers? The interior designers are going to really influence and in many ways guide the lighting designer on what they're looking for. The lighting designer will then come back and say, hey, I think we can do this. This would elevate it to another level, or we should remove this. We have too much light. Sometimes the lighting designers, they're going to look at some of these things from a more technical perspective too, going into the exact fixtures and specifications, loads, how everything's wired together. They'll look at a lot of that. Okay, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineer. On large custom homes, we like to bring these consultants onto the project to dial in the MEP systems. Now, there's a caveat. If you're saying, if we're possibly doing a smaller home or a home that's maybe more of a spec home, or something not as kind of robust as a full ground up, really high quality custom home, sometimes we can do the MEP systems in a system which is what's called design build, in which we, the architect and the designers on the job, will do conceptual layouts for the MEP systems. So we'll show locations of the plumbing, locations of the mechanical. We'll show registers, which that's another conversation. I'll touch on that after this, but we can lay out the general MEP systems where we want them from a design perspective, showing what the design intent is. And then in the field, we'll hand those off to the general contractor and the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing subcontractors who often have design build capabilities inside of their practices. So they will take our concept plans, they will do the engineering for them, and then that same company will install them. It's a nice way to work because the installation is done by the same people who did the actual engineering. That's one option. The other option is to have a separate full service MEP, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing firm do full documents, full engineering documents for the home prior to it going into construction, and not doing the design build method. Either one, there's nuances of them and they work differently. So understanding which approach you're going to take is really important, and consult your architect for that. They can lay out the positives and negatives of each approach and help to kind of give you counsel and guide you on which one they would recommend for your particular home. Okay, on the topic of mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems, I want to just touch on some of the scope that the architects and interior designers usually like to have their eyes on, which is the grills or the registers where the air is going to be either supplied or returned out of. That's really important for us to determine, to show, and to coordinate with the mechanical consultant. In terms of the electrical engineers, showing locations of the lighting, either switches or panels. We've gone to keypads on most of our homes as of late, and we're hardly doing the switches anymore. It's the keypads that we're installing in each room. So showing those locations, locating them, determining the switch legs for each one of those systems, those are really important. And then to go back on the mechanical system, having the architect and structural engineer coordinating with the mechanical engineer the locations of the FAUs or the forced air units inside of the home and the condensing units on the property is really important. If there's an FAU up in a ceiling cavity or in the joist or floor assembly of a house, we need to know that, and we want to place that there. So let's say we can possibly frame out the structural frame to accommodate the location of that unit inside of the floor assembly. Going back on the topic of the BIM modeling, so that, again, the building information modeling, the mechanical scope is often, if we are hiring a mechanical engineer, one of those scopes that we will ask them or require them to do their mechanical systems in model form. So again, we can have the architectural model, we can overlay the structural model, so the structure's in there, and then we'll take the mechanical system and overlay that into there too. So we're making sure that all of those systems work together and there's no conflict between each one of those different systems. The ducts aren't running perpendicular or through joists where we have to then in the field notch out joists. We want to try to avoid that and pre-plan for that so we're not having to make modifications and adjustments in the field. Okay. Yeah, without coordinating the MEP, you run the risk of mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. You run the risk of having possibly dropped soffits or drops in the ceiling where the mechanical installer, HVAC installer will come in and say, I need to get my duct from here to there, and there's no space for me to do it. So my only option is to frame down the ceiling and drop a ceiling to run my duct through it. What that does is, in effect, it creates a visually not appealing piece or drop in the project. It drops the ceiling height, altering the experience or the height you feel in the project. It's not a good solution. Those things really should be thought through and dealt with, conflicts minimized to the best of the team's ability prior to getting into construction, so you're not having to address those issues in the field. Okay, audio, visual, and low voltage in, let's say, larger custom homes with full home automation, audio and visual systems, so the speaker system, the television system, the home automation system. It's a great idea to bring on an AV, we call it an AV consultant early in the process, so an audio visual consultant early in the process. They're going to provide consultation on home theaters, shading systems, data networks, home security systems, and full home automation systems. They will be able to link a full home automation system. Think of that as kind of the brain, and they'll be able to link all these different systems to that brain so that a homeowner can control that system just through their iPad or keypad, whatever the unique system is. That's really important to coordinate before the home goes into construction. I know traditionally I see the home automation consultant being brought on, maybe let's say in the construction process just before framing starts. That's when some contractors will bring that on. To me, that's not a great idea. I think that the home automation technology piece of it is so integral to homes now that it needs to be coordinated just like a customary engineer would be. And it's become such an integral part of projects and people's lives that we like to do that earlier in the process. Again, it depends on the project type, the owner's appetite for technology, their interest in making their home automated. Some owners say, I don't want to be automated at all, which is great. I think that's a nice perspective in many ways. Some owners want to make their home this piece of technology and have the thing fully automated. So understanding those needs, desires, and then being able to give the owner counsel on when and if that AV consultant should be brought on is a really critical thing for us. Okay, landscape designers. So landscape can make or break projects. In many of our projects, the connection between the home and the landscape is critical. For this reason, we feel that the landscape design, we treat it as one of the most essential elements to the home and the success of the project. I view the landscape just as important as the primary spaces in the house. So what do the outdoor gardens look like? That is as critical for me as what the kitchen looks like. Especially in the climate that we design, where indoor-outdoor living is so critical. People are outdoors the majority of the year, and they're wanting to be in their gardens. They're wanting to engage with landscape. I think it's important because of health reasons. It just feels better to be outside. I'm an outdoors person. I love to be outside. I love to kind of promote that in our projects so that our owners can establish a relationship, a connection with nature when they're in their house. I think that's really key. So getting the landscape designer or landscape architect, if the project requires it, on early is very important. So in our design, so in our office at ROST, we do the architecture, we do the interior design, we also do landscape design. This is important for us. So we'll often at the beginning of our projects, we will propose the landscape design for many of the jobs, showing the hardscape, showing the pools, showing where the planting, where the gardens are, where the trees at, where the specimen trees. We do that just because of what I had mentioned previously. I view the landscape as such an integral part of the project that I felt we needed to offer that in our services. So in that process, we will design the concept landscape plan. In some scenarios where let's say the city or the jurisdiction approving the project needs to have a licensed landscape architect on board, we will then hire a third-party landscape architect to bring our initial concept design through and prepare the documents that the agency requires. But again, us or ROST in particular, having a hand in determining that kind of overall feel, design, and concept for the landscape is really critical for us. There's many other arrangements. Different architects say, I don't want to touch landscape. I don't want to have anything to do with it. You need to hire a separate landscape architect. That's fine too. But just knowing that arrangement prior to beginning your project is key. And I would advise not to leave the landscape for the end of the project. I've seen that happen in jobs where the goal is just to complete the home, finish the home, and then we're going to think about landscape as an afterthought. I advise not to do that because of kind of my thoughts and theory on how integral the landscape is to homes. I think it should be designed in tandem, in parallel with the architecture and the interior design from the start of the project. Okay, I'll keep moving through the landscape. Let's see if I missed any. Yeah, in the landscape design or concept design that we typically produce, we're going to show proposed species of plants. We're going to look at the counts of the different species, how many, let's say we need 15 foxtail agaves here. We're going to note that on the drawings. And then we're going to show sizes. So bucket size for each one of these plants. Is this a really mature specimen olive tree, or is this a kind of smaller olive tree that we're going to plant on the jobs? Okay, I think this is the last one. Definitely last but not least, interior designer. So I think I intentionally save this one towards the end because of I think the importance of this. Our philosophy that we have is that architecture is about the human experience. How do you feel moving through a space? We think of design from the interior first, and then we'll mold the project from inside to outside, obviously keeping it in conformance with the zoning requirements that determine the size and shape of the home. But we're really thinking about this thing from the interior design and the interior experience first. So interior designer really should be brought on as early in the design process as possible. Many interior design items need to be thought through before other consultants can even begin their work. For example, the interior design must be developed to know where drop soffits can be located if they need to be, as we talked about earlier, to accommodate mechanical equipment and ductwork. Air registers need to be located where they don't conflict with cabinets or they're not obtrusive on a wall. Having a well thought out interior design that jives with the architecture is critical. So ideally, the interior design, the architecture, and the landscape are cohesive. They all talk to each other. They're all kind of in this, they all are in the same kind of vein of thought. And there's not a feeling of disjunction between those three primary pieces on the project. It's critical that they work together, especially in the homes we do where we have large openings of sliding glass doors and panels, where we'll open them and the exterior gardens virtually become part of the interior space. They need to talk to each other. They can't feel disjointed, or the user will sense that. Okay, and then I'll talk about specialist consultants too, just to have this on here. So depending upon the requirements of the jurisdiction that you're working within, you may be required to bring on different specialist consultants to satisfy, let's say, an environmental agency that has jurisdiction over the lot. They may need to be brought in to satisfy those requirements. These can be environmental consultants, wildlife specialists, fire consultants, arborists, even archaeologists, just to name a few. These aren't typical, except fire is relatively typical for us, especially in these areas that we work in along the coast. These are high fire severity zones, is what they're called. So fire is pretty typical for us, but in some areas, a fire consultant would be classified as a specialist consultant. Talk to your architect about if any of these are needed. Sometimes we will know at the outset of a project if a specialist consultant is needed. Other times, as we're going through the approval process, we will be notified by the agency that there needs to be a special environmental report done on the property, in which case we'll then go through that process. But work with your architect to determine that. So assembling the project team is critical. It's all about the people working on the project. Sit down and personally meet with each member of the team and each consultant. Ask for your architect's how was their experience working with them? I think your architect in most scenarios will be very clear about the capabilities, efficiencies, communication levels that they have received from these different consultants, and they'll probably come to you, as we do at ROST, with a curated list of each one of those, the consultants in each one of those disciplines, saying, "Hey, Mr. Owner, I like working with these 3 structural engineers. I've been working with them for 15 years. I've done X amount of jobs with them. Great experience, good service. We have a close relationship. Our team works together. We know how the workflow works together." I would take those recommendations very seriously. If the owner has an outside engineer that's maybe a friend, acquaintance, brother-in-law, whatever it is, that they want to bring into the project, that can be good. But I do believe that if the architect has had previous working experience with those engineers, it's usually a bit more predictable, and can be a better experience in the end. Yeah, but it's important for the owner, nonetheless, to feel comfortable with each one of those consultants, to feel that they're personable, they're good people, they have good intent, want the job to be successful, easy to communicate, easy to sit down at a table and problem solve with. There's going to be problems on all of the jobs, or challenges rather, on all of the jobs. It's how you solve those challenges and how each one of those consultants responds to those challenges that is really a key determining factor in if they're a good fit for the job. Okay, that just about sums it up. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I know that may have been relatively in depth, a lot of nuts and bolts and technical, so probably not the most entertaining content that we can put out there, but I do believe that it's extremely valuable. I think this is a piece of the project that many owners overlook, or don't take as seriously as they need to. If you have the proper agreements with each one of those consultants, if you have the proper team, you understand the agreement with each one of those team members, you're going to have a smoother path moving forward. It's when there's misunderstandings in the scope with the consultants, misunderstanding in the billing arrangements with those consultants, and misunderstandings with maybe what they can do, that cause issues in the job during the course of construction. We want to try to prevent the situation where a consultant and an owner there's a misunderstanding in the scope. The consultant says, "Hey, owner, I need some more fees. I didn't have that in my scope. I need more fees for that." It increases the budget. It's unpredictable. We want to try to minimize that. So being clear about what all of the players on the team are going to do, their agreements are in place, and the owner understands what each of them are going to do, is really key. When we get into construction, which we'll probably talk about it at another live stream, having the contractor sit down in a kickoff meeting with each one of those consultants and the architect and owner is also key. The contractor is going to have to communicate, and will want to communicate with each one of those consultants during construction. He's going to be asking them questions, getting clarifications on the engineering elements, and establishing that rapport, that communication, that workflow at the beginning of construction is critical. Hopefully I hit that home, but I believe in really getting that dialed in at the beginning of a project to set yourself up for success. So thanks for watching. Next week is the roughly around the 4th of July holiday, so we may not do another live stream next Friday. We'll keep you posted, but if not, then we'll pick up the following week. Thanks so much, and hope you found value in that. Thanks.